وسهلا بكل الذين انضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر وعبر wnzk راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on wnzk 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
I am Dr.Atef Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM. Good morning. I am Atef Jawad reporting from Washington. How complicated the Syria situation is, listen to this. Washington is considering more military support for the opposition, but 50% of that opposition in eastern Aleppo belongs to the Nusra Front, which America is determined to eliminate. And listen to this. While Russia and the U.S. exchange threats and accusations, Secretary Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov continue their phone diplomacy. And in the middle, more than 200,000 people in Aleppo are trapped. With us to discuss Syria, a group of distinguished experts. From the U.S., Dr. Kenneth Katzman, Middle East expert with the Congressional Research Service. Suzanne Meriden, Director of Operations at the Syrian American Council. Khalil Rammal, Arab-American journalist and writer from Michigan. And from Germany, Dina Aboul Hosen, Syrian-born journalist from Berlin. She writes for Gulf News. Let me ask all our guests a question just to get a perspective. And I hope to start with you, Dr. Katzman. Now, after Aleppo, what's next?
Thank you for inviting me. Well, it's hard to say what's next because we don't know what the outcome of the Aleppo struggle is going to be. If the U.S. and Russia work out another ceasefire, we could have another period of stalemate in Aleppo where it's just simply divided and maybe some humanitarian aid goes in and some relief efforts and some hospitals can reopen maybe and the bombing stops. If it goes the other way, where Russia and the Syrian Arab regime continue to bomb it and ultimately the rebels leave and maybe even many civilians leave, then basically the war continues. The rebels have a very big, they've captured a lot of territory, even north of Hama. They're very close to Hama now. And probably these rebels would go to Idlib from Aleppo and continue to try to move south. So I don't think really anything changes if Aleppo is falling. The war just goes on. And so I'm not sure really what is changed by this Aleppo battle. Thank you.
Suzanne Meriden, the same question, please. What's
Good
next?
Morning. Good morning. And thank you for having me on. We appreciate it. And I do have to agree with the doctor. We're bracing ourselves right now. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. There is a strong chance that Aleppo might fall. All sides on the opposition are doing their best to support wherever they can for it not to fall. It would be a huge setback for the opposition and for the Syrian revolution at this point. However, like the doctor said, there are other areas. It's been a give and take. It's been a win and lose for the last 5 years, and it just goes on. Nothing is going to stop or halt completely. Things will just go on for now.
Dina Aboul Hosen in Germany.
Yes, hello, and thank you for having me in the program. Halab is not a simple word to say. It's a very important focal point right now for the struggle. There are too many international players, as we all know. Turkey will not let Halab fall, for one. So if any victory, let's say, for one of the quarreling sides happens now, it won't be long lasting. Someone will interfere to reverse the results. Halab is not a simple question. It will not be resolved until the entire conflict is resolved. And I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Dr. Katzman, the opposition is fragmented. They are fighting with each other as well as against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Why should any of the opposition group be better than Bashar al-Assad if they come to power?
Well, that's been a major question, and I think that's part of the reason why the U.S. maybe is less interested or less enthusiastic about trying to achieve the ousting of Bashar al-Assad, because the rebels have become very much dominated by hardline Islamist factions. I'm not even talking about the Islamic State, but you mentioned Nusra Front, which changed its name to try to be less unacceptable. I'm talking about Awar al-Sham and others. That's the problem, is the rebels aren't, they started out as a very secular democratic group of revolutionaries, but then it became dominated more by Islamists, and so the U.S., I think, has had trouble, painting them as good guys. They're not viewed really as purely good guys and who deserve to be in power necessarily. So it's become, that's one of the reasons why the U.S. maybe isn't pushing so hard for ousting Mr. Assad anymore.
Ms. Meriden, you are with the Syrian American Council. So tell us, please, why should the opposition be any better than Bashar al-Assad?
Sure, and thank you so much for giving me the chance to answer that question, actually. I think, the idea that a large number of the opposition is Islamist and jihadist, etc., I really think that's something the media is portraying that is not completely true. Although some parts of the opposition are, a strong and prevalent part of the opposition is that so-called moderate opposition that we do as the United States support and can support and would like to see take over Bashar al-Assad. And although it's not seen to the naked eye at this point, this particular moderate opposition has actually been working more together, going on a similar path, trying to connect, trying to speak as one voice. It is easier to, see it if you work directly on a daily basis with these groups and communicate, but not easy to see if you're just watching it along the sidelines or from the media. We, the United States, have great intelligence. We can see this, we know this, and we owe it to support those particular opposition groups. And again, they are there, they're prevalent. We just need to support them and give them the chance.
Dina Aboul Hosen, your turn.
Yes, I have to agree with Ms. Meriden on this one. The media is portraying Syrians as one group of mostly Islamist extremists, which is not the case. I come from Syria, I lived in Syria, I know what it's like. And I know that it's not what the media portrays. It's a matter of who's paying more to get their message across. And we know for sure that Syrian regime propaganda is winning on this side. So we know that the opposition, I don't speak for the opposition, I'm an independent journalist, but we know that the situation is not great now. Yes, it is indeed divided, and each is fighting for their own agenda. But we know also that the Syrian regime will not be able to rule forever. We know that we don't want Bashar al-Assad to take over from his father forever again. And we are sure that as our experience matures with time, there will be better management from the Syrian opposition. There will be better people and better management of the crisis and, of course, of the future.
Dr. Katzman, many people from the Middle East and maybe from other parts of the world tell me that they don't really understand where America stands in Syria, what America wants in Syria. Can you explain to us?
Well, I can understand that confusion because it has varied. At the beginning of the crisis, or the uprising, the U.S. was very much supportive of ousting Bashar al-Assad and very much praiseworthy of all the opposition groups, and they were starting out as peaceful protests, and then, the policy evolved. Particularly the rise of the Islamic State complicated the issue for the United States because the Islamic State also conquered areas in Iraq, and it became a global threat, a terrorist threat. So the U.S. policy shifted really to much more of a focus on defeating the Islamic State. And Bashar al-Assad and the uprising became, I think, a secondary concern for the United States. So I think right now where the U.S. policy is to continue to try to work. We have to work, of course, with Russia now because they've infiltrated, they've intervened. That's a whole other issue we can discuss, why that happened, why that wasn't prevented, but that happened. And so I think the U.S. and Russia actually agree that the outcome should be a singular Syrian state. The U.S. believes it needs to be under new leadership, coalition leadership. Russia obviously disagrees with that, but that the agreement is it should be a singular state with a continuing state structure not being dismantled, and then a coalition would rebuild the country. That's where I think the U.S. policy is.
Susan, are you happy with U.S. policy in Syria right now?
We are not happy at all, actually, and we're very confused about the behavior of the Obama administration. Obama's policy on Syria is actually what made the conflict what it is today, as deadly and bloody as it is today. Suddenly, like the doctor said, we started by supporting the idea of a free and democratic Syria, the idea of a regime change, and then suddenly we shifted to our focus on ISIS. And there's clear-cut signs that ISIS actually works directly with the Assad regime. We've seen this through oil transactions, through the regime allowing ISIS to pass through areas in Syria with no interruption at all. And we also see clear positions of ISIS towards the opposition that is trying to gain freedom and democracy for Syria. Yesterday alone, actually, they killed 30 of those opposition fighters. Unfortunately, as the U.S., we have chosen to work on treating with Band-Aids as opposed to going straight to the root. And we have recognized this as the way Obama wants to leave his legacy. It's for the Iran deal. He's trying to make sure that the Iran deal is successful. He wants to make sure Iran is happy. And Iran is a direct partner to the Assad regime, trying to infiltrate into Syria, has infiltrated into Syria. And so, unfortunately, it was a terrible policy. It led to a lot of deaths and displacement and the refugee issue, and we are not happy at all about it.
We'll be back in a moment.
Life for Relief and Development is a nonprofit charity that has been providing humanitarian aid and development to people and communities regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background for over 22 years. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life rushes to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Life also has development projects to provide medical relief, water purification, educational programs, relief for orphans, and much more. Your help and support can greatly improve these efforts. All donations are tax deductible. For more information, please visit our website at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's lifeusa.org, 248-424-7493. It's never too early to get your child on the right track. From their first words to first grade, Dreamy Children's Center in Troy works closely with parents to provide an experience that goes beyond early education. The highly qualified and experienced staff use a variety of programs that can help nurture important personality traits like responsibility, independence, problem solving, motivation, and respect. They also have educational programs ranging from preschooling for infants, toddlers, transitional toddlers, and pre-K to Montessori-approved programs and bilingual curriculums for young children. They're open from 6 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., can provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks in between, and can also arrange for after-school pickup. Dreamy Children's Center in Troy is located at 37373 DeQuinder, just above 16 Mile Road, and can be found on Facebook at Dreamy Children's Center. Ask about the free preschool program. Call today, 248-680-9170, 248-680-9170.
A car accident can change your life in an instant. As a result of a car accident, you may become unemployed. As a result of a car accident, you may need a lot of medical treatment. People think that insurance companies are on their side. Why? Because they're giving them one or two benefits. Are they giving them all the benefits they deserve? How would one know unless you consult with an attorney? Call the law offices of Jumana Kiruz at 248-557-3645. 248-557-3645.
I am Atef Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM. Welcome back to our discussion of the Syrian situation. With us now is Mr. Khalil Rammal, Arab American journalist and writer from Michigan. Mr. Rammal, why do you think President Bashar al-Assad is a better choice than any of the rebel groups?
Why do I think Bashar al-Assad is better than any of the rebel groups?
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you for hosting me with this show. I appreciate it. Second, I don't favor a certain group, but if I were to choose between the rebel group that includes ISIS and Al-Qaeda-like organizations, who are the strongest organizations on the ground. For example, there's no so-called moderate opposition, which was wiped out by the extremist groups that kidnapped the religion of Islam, which is a peaceful religion. And you have 100,000 fighters and mercenaries coming from Chechnya and to China, from other parts of the world to fight the Syrian regime. And I think it's the current government is a better choice because there had been an elections that were held, and the Syrian army is supporting the president and the government wholeheartedly. And if we want to talk on a religious basis, most of the
army units are Sunnis. The Mufti of the Republic is a Sunni, and he's supportive of the government. Because the alternative to the current regime is chaos and division in Syria, which will reverberate in the whole Middle East.
Dina Aboul Hosen, do you agree?
I have to ask here, who exactly wiped out moderate opposition? Who put hundreds of thousands in jail? Who arrested them and killed them under torture? Who sent us in all different directions just to avoid being arrested? It wasn't really the extremists. I don't live in an extremist controlled area in Syria, but my only fear if I go there is that I will be arrested by the regime. It was not extremists, and this happened long before they appeared. The Syrian regime was arresting peaceful demonstrators. It was arresting moderate opposition figures, and some of them are still in jail, and we don't know anything about their fate so far. It was not the opposition that drove us out of Syria or that caused this chaos and division. If you talk about a chaotic situation, who's causing this chaotic situation? Who's shelling people day and night with barrel bombs, with jets, with fighters? Who's raiding the civilians in Aleppo and other areas? I don't think any damage could be done that is worse than what Bashar al-Assad and his regime did to Syria.
Suzanne, Meriden, experience tells us that look at what happened in in Iraq after Saddam Hussein was toppled, in Libya after Muammar Gaddafi was toppled, in Yemen, in Egypt, even in Tunisia. So do you want to see chaos in Syria? More chaos?
So the situation in Syria is different from all the other situations. And frankly, if we dissect each country and its situation, they're different. And they all deserve freedom and democracy. But we can't say, gosh, it didn't work in one place, or look at what's happening in Iraq, therefore we can't try it. We have to leave people under oppression in Syria then. That doesn't work. And I think, Mr. Rammal proved our point earlier that the media does distort factual information. He talked about, elections and the Syrian army supporting Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad wins by 97 or 99% each time. I mean, even if you're going to mock up elections, at least, be realistic and maybe go 70%, 80%, something like that. But how can we want to see a president in place that is allowing the death of 500,000 people, that is allowing the displacement of millions of people? It truly baffles me when I see people say, no, I'd rather see this person stay running the country, when look at the devastation he has allowed in this country. Any other alternative will be a better alternative, and we just have to go into every situation knowing that there could be a better alternative. There could be a mandate if we even have to look at it. There's interim governments, there's civil societies, there's a higher negotiating committee. They're all working towards a free and democratic Syria. We cannot compare to other situations and say, God, we just can't give freedom and democracy to people because it's not working in other places. Because there are places where it is working, and we have to follow those particular establishments or examples.
Mr. Rammal, do you think Aleppo will fall? And what's next if it happens?
First, let me respond to the response of the lady. I'm sorry I didn't get the name. First of all, the election that was held, Bashar al-Assad didn't get 97% or 99%. That was his father before. He got 99%, and of course, nobody is fan of the Ba'ath Party. I want to know how Syria is different from Libya, where Libya is like two Libyas right now because of what happened there. And Syria can be divided and could harm the whole Middle East because now Aleppo and the southern parts are like other states that's controlled by So I'm really fascinated by saying that the alternative is much, much better than the current government. You know what happened with Saddam Hussein. He was a dictator and he was brutal, even though the United States worked with him before when he was fighting Iran, and he was an ally, and then turned to a foe after that. But he stabilized the government, he stabilized the country, and now look at what's happening in Iraq and Libya and even Egypt, like you mentioned. Going back to Aleppo, and I want to add something about the opposition. Again, Bashar al-Assad, which is true, which is legitimate. There was an opposition, and the Ba'ath regime is a brutal regime. It started peacefully, but then it was the opposition was kidnapped and taken away by extremist groups who distorted Islam and distorted the humanity, like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which should be the enemies of the humanity because of what they did, and I'm really fascinated by when they talk about killing thousands of people and bombing, but nobody's talking about bombing Damascus by the extremist groups and others who committed atrocious crime and massacres. We overlook those massacres, but we only look at the regime, which is fighting. It's a civil war, and this is what's happening, and nobody would condone killing and torture of human beings. Now, getting back to Aleppo, I think this is the mother of all battles, and I think it's despite the threat and face-off between the United States and Russia, I don't think it's going to be an escalation, but I think Aleppo is going to fall to it's going to be, the government is going to stabilize the area, and I think the government is going to win because now ISIS is in a very bad situation. It's cornered between Iraq and Syria, and as you noticed that the truce was violated. The United States wringed off its hands from working with the Russians, and this is really deplorable because the rebel groups, the so-called rebel groups, are majority of them are ISIS and extremist groups that committed atrocious crimes against the West and particularly against the United States, and nobody can explain how can the United States, not work closely to wipe out those groups, which are threats and jeopardize the security of the West and particularly the United States.
Dina, would you like to respond to Mr. Rammal?
Yes, of course. When we talk about the majority of rebels being ISIS, I think this is very unrealistic. I am Syrian. I know the Syrian people. I know that they are fighting ISIS as much as they are fighting the Syrian regime. And if we add up all the crimes committed by the opposition together, the ones you're talking about, like the bombs in Damascus, they will amount to a small fraction of what we've seen the Syrian regime commit. It's not fair to say that the regime is fighting, but the others are not allowed to fight. I don't agree with any killing of civilians of any side, but it's not fair to assume that people have to accept being shelled and killed with barrel bombs, with jets, with chemical weapons, and not respond at all. You can't argue with weapons.
We'll talk about the situation regarding the civilian population in Aleppo in a second after the break.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937.
248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937. Are you going to start a restaurant or a grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Aboud at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Aboud now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Aboud, 734-744-9796.
Welcome to the United States. Please proceed to the passport control.
ماذا يقول؟ إلى أين أذهب؟ ماذا علي أن أفعل؟ لو سمحت، هل تساعدني؟ ماذا قال هذا الرجل في الإعلان؟
ألا تعرف الإنجليزية؟
أعرف، ولكن أساسيات فقط.
عليك بتعلم اللغة.
ولكن أين؟
يوتيكا كوميونيتي سكول ESL بروجرام، أساتذة متخصصون، منهج متميز، يمكنك التسجيل طوال العام. لرسوم التسجيل ومواعيد الفصول الدراسية عليك الاتصال بالهاتف رقم
586-797-6960 586-797-6960.
تحدث اللغة وتعلم نمط الحياة مع يوتيكا كوميونيتي سكول ESL بروجرام. تعلم، تحدث وأكثر.
I am Atif Abdel Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM. Welcome back to our discussion of the situation in Syria, and I would like to ask Suzanne, Meriden, we have reports, media reports about a dire situation in eastern Aleppo as far as the civilian population is concerned. But on the other hand, we also see footage, video footage broadcast by the government-run television outlets in Syria that show normal life in eastern Aleppo. What is the reality there?
Sure. The reality is that there is indeed a dire situation. Over 300,000 people are under siege in Aleppo. The siege needs to break ASAP. There's no, food or medicine being allowed inside. Convoys that we think the Assad regime has finally allowed to go inside, then they get struck by Russia from the air, and so that food and medicine never gets to the residents inside. And we know that the regime uses propaganda all the time on their television stations showing that there is normal life. And so, we completely mistrust the regime. We know the regime is responsible for this killing. We know the regime uses the siege to tighten the noose around civilian necks to, have them surrender. And unfortunately, people are dying. People are in a dire situation. Something needs to happen ASAP. The quick short-term answer is, convoys need to be allowed. Russia needs to stop bombing them. We've also seen now, we've seen it for a while, that hospitals and, anywhere that is possibly present to help the dying civilians, the injured civilians, is being bombed. But now in the last few weeks, we've seen bunker busters by the Russian army where they send these bombs that create craters deep into the earth and then, allow for this earthquake effect to topple down buildings and to, also bomb shelters. So civilians have nowhere to go. They have nowhere to seek shelter. And so the situation is getting worse and worse. We're seeing new weaponry by Russia. There's a scary partnership between the regime and Russia right now. And so we need someone to establish a no-fly zone ASAP. That is something that's been asked of the U.S. administration for a long time. Other foreign countries like Turkey or France have said they would be willing to establish a no-fly zone, but they're waiting on the green light from the United States as well. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that from the Obama administration. And that is the number one item that could help us right now. As a matter of fact, there's a bill in Congress that we're trying to get to a vote. It's called the Caesar Bill, Caesar Civilian Protection Act. A lot of co-sponsors are actually jumping on that bandwagon. They support it. What it does is it'll help halt the killing. It'll put sanctions on the Assad regime or anyone that supports the regime, and it'll study the feasibility of the no-fly zone. So that's a little bit of a longer-term solution, but even that actually Congress received direct order from Obama to not put it to vote. It was supposed to go to a vote sometime in the past 2 weeks. And so, again, we're seeing our administration not want to intervene, allow for the killing to happen, but a no-fly zone is necessary to halt civilian killing, innocent civilian killing.
Dina, I'm sure you have family or friends in Syria. What are they telling you about the humanitarian situation there?
It's worse than words can describe. The humanitarian situation in the besieged areas, under the shelling, even the civil defense forces which were helping people in areas that are out of the regime's control, they were discredited by supporters of the regime. There was this campaign to nominate them for a Nobel Peace Prize, and there was this huge campaign to discredit them. Even the people who are just doing their best to help civilians, take them out from under their wrecks, give them first aid, take them to field hospitals. The situation is much worse than anyone can imagine. Watching family members die, watching friends die. There is a 7-year-old child from Aleppo who posts daily updates. She posts videos. Sometimes it's the sound of shelling. Sometimes it's a wreck that she says, this is a building next to us. My friend used to live here. My friend died. Then this child says, I'm afraid I'm going to die too. The situation is just too bad to be described. And I would like to say something here. When we talk about extremists, what exactly is Hezbollah? What exactly are they doing in Syria? Who got them there? We only see one part of extremism, which is Sunni extremism and Daesh. But I don't think Hezbollah is exactly a secular force. They were called to support the Syrian regime. Russia is supporting the Syrian regime. Iran is supporting the Syrian regime. I don't think any of these forces can be described as a force for good. They were all supporting the Syrian regime against the Syrian people. The friends of the Syrian people didn't help them as much as expected, whereas the friends of the regime were really good at that. They helped him immediately.
Mr. Rammal, can you answer Dina's question? What is Hezbollah doing in Syria?
Well, I don't want to get into Hezbollah and Lebanese politics and what they're doing in Syria. They're using this as a ploy. Everybody, there's too many players in Syria, and there's too many parties are in Syria right now. But the Hezbollah and Lebanon, they were latecomers to the game, to the war. I mean. There were Saudi forces, there were Chechnya from Chechnya, there's from Igor, Chinese, from Tunisia, all over the world. They were in Syria first. And they were supporting the so-called rebels, while their leaders are living in five-star hotels in Paris and in Washington and New York and London. It's very deplorable, the human loss and the killing in Syria, and nobody can condone that. But the problem is, there is no so-called moderate, opposition. Remember the Syrian Free Army and other so-called moderate groups? They were taken over by ISIS and other extremist groups. So Hezbollah, whether their position is right or wrong, I'm not here to defend it, but they are latecomers to the war in Syria. And by the way, they were trying to mediate in the beginning of the conflict between the Syrian regime and the opposition, and they were trying to, use their good intentions because they had they were well received by everybody there at the time as a resistance group, but things failed because the opposition they turned extremists and they were taken over, like I said, by all mercenaries of the world. And it's really, like I said, human loss is very deplorable. But look at the other side. Everybody's talking about the Syrians, which is right, about the Syrian refugees and the problem. Look at Yemen, another country that's being besieged by Saudi Arabia, which is a close ally of the United States. And in fact, Obama is giving them like billions of dollars of weapons. And look at them, they're bombing children, they're killing babies and children, and they're bombing hospitals and mosques, and continue bombing. They destroyed the infrastructure of the country. They committed massacres, even by acknowledgement from the United Nations and other amnesty groups and international groups. So, that's what I want to say. All groups should be out of Syria, and they should, Syrian people, work with each other and stop all these foreign interventions.
What is needed, Mr. Rammal, to make sure that the civilian population in eastern Aleppo, to make sure that they get their food and medicine? You heard what Dina and Susan said about the dire situation there.
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but there should be human convoys going to the civilians, because civilians have the right of protection, and they shouldn't be thrown into the war and be killed, randomly like this. International relief organizations, they should be allowed. But I don't think it's only the regime's fault that's not allowing not allowing the convoys to go. There was some villages that were totally besieged by the so-called opposition, which is ISIS, by the way, like Nubal and the Zahra and other areas that were totally besieged for 2 or 3 years, and nobody talked about this. Nobody mentioned those people, that hundreds and thousands of people, they were, under siege and under the rule of ISIS and other terrorist groups.
We'll be back in a minute.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Dana, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products, because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
Welcome to the United States. Please proceed to the passport control.
ماذا يقول؟ إلى أين أذهب؟ ماذا علي أن أفعل؟ لو سمحت، هل تساعدني؟ ماذا قال هذا الرجل في الإعلان؟
ألا تعرف الإنجليزية؟
أعرف ولكن أساسيات فقط.
عليك بتعلم اللغة.
ولكن أين؟
يوتيكا كوميونيتي سكول ESL بروجرام، أساتذة متخصصون، منهج متميز، يمكنك التسجيل طوال العام. لرسوم التسجيل ومواعيد الفصول الدراسية عليك الاتصال بالهاتف رقم
586-797-6960 586-797-6960.
تحدث اللغة وتعلم نمط الحياة مع يوتيكا كوميونيتي سكول ESL بروجرام. تعلم، تحدث وأكثر.
أسواق زمزم الواقع على 24065 أورشاد ليك في مدينة فارمington هيلز ترحب بالجالية العربية والكلدانية. تنزيلات كبيرة على عموم المواد الغذائية في يوم الأربعاء من كل أسبوع. لا تنسوا فريش كاري اوت، جميع انواع المعجنات، وايضا صواني الكمبو المشكله والصمون الحار. لحوم حلال الجاليه العربيه والاسلاميه الملحمه باداره قصاب الجاليه المعروف سلوان جربوع. زوروهم على 24065 اورشاد ليك في مدينه فارمington هيلز او اتصلوا بهم على 248-476-0300. اسواق زمزم للمذاقي عنوان لجميع طلباتكم. اتصلوا على 248-476-0300. اسواق زمزم للمعامله الراقية وكرم الضيافة عنوان.
I am Atif Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM. Welcome back to our discussion of the situation in Syria. And Susan, you heard Mr. Rammal talk about foreign intervention in Syria and how that is part of the problem. We are not talking about just Russian and Turkish intervention, but Arab countries are sponsoring, supporting, funding, organizing rebel groups. Do you think that is part of the problem or part of the solution?
You know, I think one interesting point that our guest did mention is that, you know, there is some intervention right now in Syria, but some of that intervention is actually needed intervention. For instance, those who are supporting the opposition groups with man-pads. You know, the only way we can leave it to Syrians only to fight the Syrian cause, fight the Syrian issues, is by allowing them to have the tools they need to fight back. You know, when many of the FSA groups defected, they really just had what they had. They didn't have what the Syrian regime army had as far as tools, as far as, you know, what's needed in order to fight back. And, you know, unfortunately, we talk about some of these extremist groups that have generated from the issue. You know, again, let's be clear that these extremist groups are a small amount compared to the opposition groups that are fighting inside Syria. But if you corner them long enough and they have to fight back and they get desperate enough, they will react. And ISIS is actually a perfect example of that. ISIS was a direct product of the chaos created by the Assad regime in Syria. But, you know, while these extremists like ISIS are responsible for some killing, really they're responsible for 2%. And these are studied numbers that I'm sharing here, but they're responsible for about 2%, while the Assad regime, along with Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, and we do have to talk about Hezbollah. We can't just say we can't discuss it. They have been a huge factor in strengthening and emboldening the regime as well. They're responsible for 98% of the killing. And so again, we have to look at the root of the problem, and for the opposition groups and the FSA to be able to fight back the root of the problem, then they do need tools, they do need man-pads, and that's the support we want to see from some of the foreign and Arab groups.
Dina, go ahead.
Allow me to respond to that.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating. First of all, she's saying that the regime is responsible for 98% of the killing. That's a very interesting number. I don't know how they verify this number, first of all. And then they need the tools to fight the regime. Does this include nuclear weapons and chemical weapons that ISIS now have, like they said? And the other myth that really make me really puzzled is that the regime, the secular Ba'ath regime, created ISIS. Well, let me remind you that ISIS started in Iraq, and there was no Bashar al-Assad in Iraq. And to say that they are a small group, small fraction in Syria, that's really laughable because they almost occupied half of Iraqi territories. And they're everywhere in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor and Daraa and all these areas. Let me also remind you about one report that came out that said, while the United States was giving those tools, so-called tools, which is weapons, to the rebel areas, they fell in the hands of al-Nusra, which is a integral part of Al-Qaeda, which is the sworn enemy of the United States. And they admitted that. They said that these weapons fell in the hands of those terrorists that are terrorizing and killing people, and by eating their hearts and butchering them and having children kill grown men and drowning them, and like this with the Jordanian pilot, they put him in a cage and set fire to him. So it's really laughable when they say that the regime created that ISIS and other terrorist groups, a secular regime. But I remind the listeners that ISIS started actually in Iraq, and there was no Syrian regime over there.
I would like to answer.
Go
back.
ahead, Susan.
Yes, thank you. So, as far as the numbers I provided you, the 98% versus 2%, we'll be happy to provide you the resources that we work with so we can show you those numbers. But more importantly, if you would allow me to finish, please. You said, excuse me.
Well,
excuse me.
Mr. Rammal, please let Susan take
Well, I would like to know these resources. Are they from the opposition, from the propaganda of the opposition?
Well,
you've had your chance.
Hotel?
You've had your chance, and let me have my chance now to speak, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Interesting thing, when you talk about ISIS, you said that I said ISIS was created by the regime. I actually never said that. I said ISIS was a direct product of the chaos created by the regime inside Syria. But that's interesting because that's another argument that comes up all the time. So, and that can be something negotiated as well. I'm glad to hear that you do not like ISIS. We do not like ISIS either. As a matter of fact, the opposition is having to fight off both the regime and both ISIS. But what I did mention earlier is that it is very clear that the regime and ISIS do work together. There has been oil transactions done between the two. The regime, basically, by doing oil transactions with ISIS, is funding ISIS. How do we allow for a regime to stay in place that is funding this terrorist group that you are so angry about? And I'm glad you're angry about this terrorist group, but just as you're angry about ISIS, you should be angry about the Assad regime, because that is the even bigger terrorist in Syria right now.
We have Mr. Khalil Hashim on the telephone. Please go ahead, Mr. Hashim.
This is really very interesting.
Hello?
The regime,
Mr. Hashim, go ahead.
Yes, it's unfortunate to listen to Syrians at this point asking for more weapons to continue the killing in Syria. What really needs to happen in Syria is ceasefire. You need to stop the killing. You need to save the innocent people out there. It's also disheartening to hear, somebody like Susan and Dina continue. They seem to be still in the aspiration part of this conflict between honest, truthful opposition against a brutal regime. And, I like to note here that all Syrians and all people in the Middle East deserve more democratic, more fair government to represent them instead of dictatorships like Assad and others. However, this conflict has morphed into something totally different, We're dealing with something totally different right now. We're no longer dealing with an opposition against the government. We're dealing with the threat of outside intervention, with the threat of ideology, sectarian ideology, whether you support it or not. You know, it's so naive to think that sending few weapons is going to change the equation on the ground. Who is really paying the price on the ground, regardless of who's bombing who? The people paying the price on the ground are the innocent people who really had nothing to say and nothing to do. These are the people who are really getting abused by the bombs from the regime, getting abused by the opposition, getting abused by all of these terrorist groups there. You know, this is what we really need to think about. We need to think about the immediate ceasefire, try to negotiate some kind of a resolution to isolate, if there are any, if you can find them, those remnants of the original opposition, which, by the way, the original opposition to the government was composed of Syrians from all walks of life. Okay, they were just a pro-regime and against regime and Sunni and Shia and all of that. They were from all walks of life. So that's what needs to happen. Plus, there needs to be, and it can be done, it's called R2P, it's a provision of the United Nations resolutions, in which it would allow a replacement and exit for the current regime to have there. For anybody to say, oh, anybody who comes in is better than the regime is totally naive, totally irresponsible, because we have a huge threat right there, which is called, you know, the extremist religious people, and I don't care who they belong to. The whole conflict has morphed after Saudi Arabia hijacked the conflict, and then Iran got into it, then the United States got into it, then Turkey and Israel, then now we're dealing with Russia and the United States. This is a much bigger onion to peel than just a group of opposition against the brutal regime. Where have you been? Wake up, guys.
Hashim. Thank you, Mr. Hashim. Now, Dina, as you heard, we have several failed ceasefires. Do you think it's still worth it to keep trying another ceasefire?
It's worth it, provided we don't get aid caravans shelled. It's very much worth it, provided the regime doesn't break it. It's worth trying everything we can to save as many civilians as possible. I just have one word here that I must add. Talking about the Saudi intervention in Yemen, talking of what they're doing. What exactly have they done that Russia hadn't done in Syria? Russia and Iran and the Syrian regime. They're targeting hospitals? Check. Targeting civilians? Check. Destroying infrastructure? Check, check, check. How can you condemn it on one side and condone it on the other? How can you do that? This double standards in seeing matters just based upon our own interest or the interest of one party that we want is something I find most fascinating. We can't do that. If you say this is wrong on one side, then it's definitely wrong on all sides. Otherwise, it is definitely double standard.
Dina Aboul Hosen, thank you very much for joining us from Germany. I also would like to thank all our guests, Khalil, Rammal, Suzanne, Meriden, and we also were joined by Dr. Kenneth Katzman. I will see you the first Friday of next month. Thank you for joining us.